Once again, just to reiterate, the benchmark by which all Spider-Man films are measured, this bad boy right here. So Sony are now utilising their entire remaining stakes that they have in Spider-Man and Marvel comics that they currently hang on to the fullest of their extent by making an animated, entirely standalone Spider-Man film. But the question is this a gamble that is going to pay off for Sony Animation Studios? Let's get into it! Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a Sony Pictures Spider-Man movie. It's one of the last ones that they have, I think, that they can currently do with Spider-Man before they expand out and explore other Spider-Man characters that they still own the rights to. But because this is an animated movie that they have hung on to the rights to do, this means that it is not intruding on anything that Marvel and the MCU are currently doing with that version of Spider-Man. This is an entirely different one. In fact, in this film, they reference films from the Sam Raimi era of Spider-Man films that they still have the rights and everything to. So you know that this is part of that universe. But what Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse does is it introduces Miles Morales as Spider-Man. And originally when Miles Morales got introduced in the Ultimate Universe, I wasn't initially a fan of that character. It all felt a little bit flash in the pan-y for me. I felt like it was a character that had been introduced kind of just to shake things up a little bit. But after a while, he hung in there and the Ultimate Universe had a brand new Spider-Man that was taking over from Peter Parker. And people really responded to him, and now he is part of the main canon in the comics for Marvel as another Spider-Man. And I've actually really warmed to this character. And what Into the Spider-Verse does is it opens up the multi-dimensional theory that there is in fact a different Spider-Person on each Earth that there is in the multiverse. And what I like about this is that it doesn't just focus on one kind of Spider-Man. I do like the Peter Parker version that they have in this film. He's a little bit older, he's been Spider-Man for a while, and in the trailers you get the sense that maybe he's a little bit out of his depth for some reason, and there is a really well written reason why that is involved in the film. But also you get other really interesting characters from around the Spider-Verse, different kind of versions of Spider-Man that have been tried in different comic books over the years, including Spider-Man Noir, who surprisingly was voiced by Nick Cage in this film. It completely took me by surprise, and I've got to say, all of the lines that he came out with when they were delivered with the voice of Nick Cage, it just had me in hysterics. There's also other characters from around the multi-dimensions that I've found interesting to see as well, like Spider-Ham. I forgot that this character kind of existed inside the Spider-Man narrative. And what also made me laugh is that I completely forgot that he wasn't a pig bitten by a radioactive spider. He was a spider bitten by a radioactive pig. But at its heart, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is essentially an origins story. But this time it is an origin story of Miles Morales, and you get all of those scenes of growing pains and discovering powers and kind of coming into your own as Spider-Man, and him being trained and mentored by an older Peter Parker was something really interesting to see. So yes, this is an Origins movie, but it's not an Origins movie that we've kind of really seen on a big screen film adaptation before. And the animation style that gets used throughout this film is absolutely incredible. There were certain scenes that were animated in this particular way that just felt really like they were lifting a comic book into life. And actually I found it interesting that if you look closely at the different characters from the different multi-dimensions of the different spider people that there are, they're all individually animated slightly differently for the entire time that you see them, against the backdrop of what you already know to be this animated film in a particular style. And ultimately, yes, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did have everything that I wanted to see from a Spider-Man film in there. It had heart, it had humour, it had purpose, it had great animation. It had a bunch of things that I just didn't entirely expect to see from an animated kids film of Spider-Man, but lo and behold, it's in there, and it rings true to the comic books as well. So with that in mind, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse gets 4.5 stars from me. This definitely lives up to the benchmark of Spider-Man films. It's probably up there as one of the most satisfying Spider-Man films that I've seen. Spider-Man 2, obviously, still the benchmark by which all Spider-Man movies will be judged. Spider-Man Homecoming reached quite far up that list, but I've got to say, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did a brilliant job of pulling off and executing a Spider-Man film in an animated style in a near flawless fashion. And I've got to say, rather than doing reboots or an expanded universe of different Spider-Man characters without actually involving Spider-Man in any way, Sony Animated Pictures could just do an entire Spider-Man animated universe of films like this. I would go and see way more of those. This is a gamble that has definitely paid off in Sony Pictures' favour, and I think that this is an interesting way that they can hang on to their rights for Spider-Man and do something completely original with it. So, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Have you seen it? What did you think about it? Would you watch more films from Sony Animated Studios like this one in the same style? And if so, what storylines would you like to see covered? All comments are welcome in the comments section below. Let's talk nerdy. As always, if you've enjoyed what you've seen here and you want to see more, you can click right here to subscribe and see more funky fresh videos from yours truly. And until that point, what else can I say other than with great power comes great responsibility. Just remember that, Sony. Just you remember that.